What if I told you that one of the brightest witches of her age could have fallen in love with Hogwarts' most noble champion? What if Hermione Granger and Cedric Diggory had crossed paths in a way that changed everything we know about the Harry Potter story? Today, we're diving deep into this fascinating alternate timeline, exploring how a relationship between these two remarkable individuals could have reshaped the entire wizarding world. Buckle up, because this journey is going to take us through romance, tragedy, and possibilities that J.K. Rowling never wrote. Let's set the stage. It's the beginning of Harry's 4th year at Hogwarts, and the Triwizard Tournament has just been announced. The castle is buzzing with excitement, and students from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang are arriving. Among the Hogwarts champions hoping to enter their names is Cedric Diggory, a 6th-year Hufflepuff who embodies everything the house stands for: loyalty, hard work, fair play, and dedication. He's handsome, talented, and genuinely kind, not the typical pretty face with an empty head. Cedric is intelligent, strategic, and has a moral compass that rivals Hermione's own. Meanwhile, Hermione Granger is entering her 4th year with her usual determination. She's fresh off her success with the Time Turner, having managed an impossible course load while also helping Sirius Black escape. She's brilliant, passionate about justice, and increasingly frustrated with Ron's immaturity. The tension between Hermione and Ron has been building, and while Harry remains oblivious to most of it, anyone paying attention can see that Hermione is ready for someone who appreciates her intellect and drive. So how do they meet? Not in a dramatic love-at-first-sight kind of way, but in a manner that's true to both their characters. Picture this. It's late September, and Hermione is in the library researching house elf rights for SPEW, her organization dedicated to improving conditions for magical creatures. She's surrounded by towers of books, frantically taking notes, when someone approaches her table. It's Cedric Diggory, looking slightly sheepish as he asks if he can share the table since everywhere else is full. Hermione, always polite despite her intense focus, agrees. What starts as a simple shared workspace becomes something more when Cedric notices what she's reading. Instead of mocking her or dismissing her concerns the way Ron does, Cedric asks genuine questions. He's curious about her research, admits he's never really thought deeply about house elf welfare, and listens intently as Hermione explains her position. For Hermione, this is revelatory. Here's someone older, respected, and accomplished who's actually taking her seriously. He doesn't laugh at her badges or roll his eyes at her passion. He engages with her ideas thoughtfully and even offers some insights of his own. Cedric mentions that his father works at the Ministry and has talked about how complex magical creature rights can be from a legislative standpoint. This opens up an entirely new avenue of conversation for Hermione, who suddenly realizes she's been so focused on the moral arguments that she hasn't fully considered the political strategy needed to create real change. They talk for hours, long past when Cedric initially planned to leave. When Madame Pince finally kicks them out at closing time, both of them are surprised by how quickly the evening passed. This becomes a pattern. They start meeting in the library regularly, initially under the pretense of studying, but increasingly just to talk. Cedric is preparing for his NEUTs and finds that explaining concepts to Hermione helps him understand them better. Hermione, meanwhile, discovers that Cedric has a sharp mind for strategy and creative problem-solving that complements her own encyclopedic knowledge. They challenge each other intellectually in ways that feel exciting rather than combative. The first time Harry notices something might be developing is during a Hogsmeade weekend. He spots Hermione and Cedric at the Three Broomsticks, sitting close together, laughing at something in a book they're sharing. When Harry mentions it to Ron later, Ron's response is predictably explosive. He can't believe Hermione is hanging around with Cedric Diggory of all people. The pretty boy Hufflepuff who probably can't even understand half of what Hermione talks about. Harry, more perceptive than Ron in this moment, points out that Cedric is actually really smart and was one of the top students in his year. But Ron isn't hearing it. The jealousy that Ron feels isn't just about losing Hermione to someone else romantically, though that's certainly part of it. It's also about feeling inadequate. Cedric represents everything Ron isn't: confident, accomplished, from a respectable wizarding family that isn't poor, good at Quidditch, popular, and mature. When Ron looks at Cedric, he sees all his own insecurities reflected back at him. And the fact that Hermione, the girl he's been dancing around having feelings for, seems genuinely interested in spending time with Cedric makes those insecurities burn even hotter. As the Triwizard Tournament approaches, the dynamic shifts. When Cedric's name is drawn from the Goblet of Fire, Hermione is visibly worried. She's been getting to know him, understanding his sense of honor and duty, and she knows he'll take this competition seriously even though it's clearly dangerous. Then Harry's name emerges, and everything becomes complicated. The school turns against Harry, believing he somehow cheated to enter himself in the tournament. Cedric, caught in the middle, handles it with characteristic grace, but there's tension. Hermione is torn. Her loyalty to Harry is absolute, but she also understands Cedric's position. She becomes a bridge between them in a way, helping them understand each other's perspectives. When she explains to Cedric how frightened and confused Harry is, how he definitely didn't enter himself, Cedric listens. Unlike many others in the castle, he chooses to believe her, and by extension, Harry. This willingness to see past his own disappointment at having to share the spotlight and instead focus on what's right makes Hermione respect him even more. The weeks leading up to the first task are intense. Hermione divides her time between helping Harry figure out how to survive a dragon and spending time with Cedric, who's become increasingly important to her. She tries to be subtle about helping Cedric prepare, not wanting to give him an unfair advantage over Harry, but also unable to stand by and do nothing when someone she cares about is in danger. Cedric notices her internal struggle and addresses it directly one evening in the library. He tells her that he appreciates her help but understands her loyalty to Harry comes first, that he'd never ask her to compromise that. This conversation, honest and vulnerable, deepens their connection even more. The night before the first task, Hermione can barely sleep. She's terrified for both Harry and Cedric, imagining all the ways things could go wrong. She sneaks down to the common room and finds Harry there, equally unable to sleep. They talk for hours about everything and nothing, and Harry finally asks her directly about Cedric. Hermione, usually so guarded about her feelings, opens up. She tells Harry that she thinks she's falling for Cedric, that he makes her feel seen and valued in ways she's never experienced before. But she's scared because of the tournament and because she doesn't want it to change their friendship. Harry, in a moment of maturity beyond his years, tells her that he's happy for her, that Cedric is a good person, and that their friendship could never change because of something like this. The first task itself is terrifying to watch. Hermione sits in the stands, gripping her seat so hard she leaves marks in the wood. When Cedric faces his dragon, a Swedish short snout, she holds her breath through the entire performance. He handles it brilliantly, using the transfiguration strategy she helped him develop to distract the dragon while he retrieves the golden egg. When he succeeds, relatively uninjured, Hermione's relief is palpable. Then it's Harry's turn, and she's terrified all over again. But Harry's triumph with his horntail is equally impressive. After the task, there's a celebration in the Hufflepuff common room, and Cedric invites Hermione. It's the first time she's been in the Hufflepuff common room, with its warm yellow tones, comfortable furniture, and general atmosphere of coziness and acceptance. The Hufflepuffs welcome her enthusiastically, many of them having noticed Cedric's interest in her and approving of his choice. Hermione finds herself relaxing in a way she rarely does at Gryffindor parties, where there's always an edge of competition and one-upmanship. Here, people seem genuinely happy for each other's successes rather than comparing themselves constantly. Cedric finds her later in the evening, after the excitement has died down a bit. He takes her hand and leads her to a quiet corner, and for a moment, they just look at each other. Then Cedric tells her that having her in the stands today, knowing she was watching and believing in him, gave him courage he didn't know he had. Hermione responds that watching him face that dragon was one of the most terrifying experiences of her life, and she's immensely proud of how brilliantly he performed. The moment is charged with emotion, and they both know something has shifted between them, that they've moved beyond friendship into something deeper and more intense. The Yule Ball changes everything. In the original timeline, Hermione goes with Victor Krum, making Ron insanely jealous and creating one of their biggest fights. But in this timeline, when Cedric asks Hermione to the ball, she says yes without hesitation. She's been hoping he would ask, and when he does, in his straightforward, earnest way, telling her he can't imagine going with anyone else, she's genuinely thrilled. Ron's reaction is even worse than it was with Krum. At least Krum was from another school, someone temporary. But Cedric? He's here, at Hogwarts, and Ron has to watch them together all the time. The preparation for the Yule Ball becomes an important bonding experience for Hermione and Ginny. Ginny, who's attending with Neville, helps Hermione get ready, styling her hair and offering advice on makeup and robes. During this time, Hermione confides in Ginny about her feelings for Cedric, how intense and overwhelming they are, how she's never felt this way before. Ginny, wise beyond her years, tells Hermione that what she's describing sounds like real love, not just a crush, and that she should embrace it rather than overthinking it. Hermione appreciates Ginny's straightforward approach, so different from her own tendency to analyze everything to death. The night of the Yule Ball is magical for Hermione and Cedric. Hermione stuns everyone when she descends the stairs in her periwinkle blue robes, her hair elegantly styled. Cedric, waiting at the bottom, can barely take his eyes off her. They dance together, and there's a moment where everything else fades away. The music, the other students, even the tournament itself seems distant and unimportant. Cedric tells her she's extraordinary, not just beautiful, but brilliant and brave and unlike anyone he's ever met. Hermione, who's spent so much of her life being dismissed or valued only for her academic achievements, feels truly seen. During a break from dancing, they step outside into the winter garden that's been created for the occasion. The fairy lights, the ice sculptures, the rose bushes glittering with frost. It's all breathtakingly beautiful. They walk through it together, their hands intertwined, their breath creating clouds in the cold air. They talk about everything from their childhoods to their dreams for the future, from silly things like favorite flavors of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, to serious topics like what they want to do after Hogwarts, how they want to make a difference in the world. Later that night, they walk around the grounds, talking under the stars. Cedric opens up about the pressure he feels, not just from the tournament, but from everyone's expectations. Everyone sees him as perfect Cedric Diggory, the ideal student, but he worries about living up to that image. He's afraid of failing, of disappointing people. Hermione shares her own struggles with feeling like she has to prove herself constantly, to fight for every bit of respect she gets because she's Muggle-born. They bond over this shared understanding of carrying weight that others don't see. Their first kiss happens that night, gentle and tentative, neither of them quite believing this is real. When they pull apart, Cedric smiles and says he's wanted to do that for weeks. Hermione admits she's been hoping he would. From that moment on, they're together, and while they try to be discreet, it's impossible to hide completely. The whole school seems to have an opinion about Hermione Granger and Cedric Diggory becoming a couple. The relationship affects the tournament in unexpected ways. Hermione, being Hermione, throws herself into helping Cedric prepare for each task. She researches spells, strategies, and magical creatures with even more intensity than she brings to her own studies. For the first task with the dragons, she helps him develop a plan that plays to his strengths. Cedric is touched by her dedication but also worried about her sacrificing her own work for him. This leads to their first real argument, where Hermione insists that she wants to help him, that his safety matters to her. Cedric realizes this is how Hermione shows love, through action and support, and he learns to accept her help gracefully. What's interesting is how Hermione's involvement creates a ripple effect. She's helping both Cedric and Harry prepare, which means Harry actually has more support than in the original timeline. Ron is still barely speaking to Harry during this period, hurt and jealous about both the tournament and the Hermione situation, but Hermione's assistance compensates somewhat. She divides her time between the two wizards in her life. Though Cedric gets the romantic attention that Harry definitely doesn't want anyway. The period between the first and second tasks allows their relationship to develop more fully. They establish routines, finding time for each other despite their busy schedules. Early morning walks around the lake before breakfast become their special time, when the castle is still quiet and they can talk without interruption. They study together in the library, though they're often more distraction than help to each other, stealing kisses between chapters and making each other laugh when they should be focused on coursework. Cedric introduces Hermione to his friend group, other Hufflepuffs and students from various houses who've known him for years. Hermione is nervous at first, worried they'll resent her for taking up so much of Cedric's time, but they welcome her warmly. She discovers that Cedric has been talking about her to his friends, that they've been curious to meet this brilliant Gryffindor who's captured his heart. Through these interactions, Hermione learns more about Cedric, hearing stories from his friends about his loyalty, his sense of humor, the way he's always willing to help someone who's struggling. Similarly, Cedric spends more time with Harry and the other Gryffindors. Harry appreciates having an older student to talk to, someone who takes him seriously but also offers perspective. Cedric and Harry bond over their shared experience of being thrust into the tournament spotlight, dealing with expectations and pressure and the very real danger of the tasks. They develop inside jokes about the absurdity of some of the tournament hype, laughing together about Rita Skeeter's ridiculous articles and the way everyone treats them like celebrities rather than students. The second task brings everything into sharp focus. When Hermione is taken as Cedric's hostage, the thing he would miss most, it's a public declaration of their relationship's seriousness. Underwater, bound in the Merpeople's village, Hermione is both terrified and oddly touched that she's what Cedric would miss most. The other hostages are there too. Ron for Harry, Cho for Cedric in the original timeline, but now replaced by Hermione, Fleur's sister Gabriel. Hermione tries not to panic, trusting that Cedric will come for her. But time underwater stretches endlessly, and fear creeps in, despite her rational mind telling her it will be okay. When Cedric reaches her, cutting through her bonds and pulling her upward, the relief on his face is unmistakable. They break the surface together and Hermione gasps for air while Cedric keeps one arm around her, making sure she's okay. On the platform, they cling to each other, both shaking from cold and adrenaline. Cedric whispers that he was so scared something would go wrong, that he wouldn't reach her in time. Hermione tells him she trusted him completely, that she knew he'd come for her. The raw emotion between them is visible to everyone watching, and even those who doubted the seriousness of their relationship before can't doubt it now. This is when Ron finally has to confront reality. Seeing Hermione nearly die, seeing how devastated Cedric was at the thought of losing her, forces Ron to acknowledge that this isn't some casual teenage romance. They truly care about each other. It doesn't make his jealousy disappear, but it does make him realize he needs to mature and accept the situation. In a rare moment of emotional intelligence, Ron apologizes to Harry for doubting him about the tournament and awkwardly tells Hermione he's glad she's okay. It's not a perfect reconciliation, but it's a start toward healing their friendship. The weeks after the second task are some of the happiest of Hermione and Cedric's relationship. The pressure of the next task is still ahead, but for now they can just enjoy being together. They're more open about their relationship, holding hands in the corridors, sitting together at meals when house tables aren't mandatory, stealing kisses in empty classrooms. Their happiness is infectious, and even students who were skeptical at first find themselves rooting for the couple. Cedric takes Hermione flying one weekend, something she's always been nervous about. He's patient and encouraging, letting her sit in front of him on his broom, his arms around her, keeping her safe. They don't go very high or very fast, just enough for Hermione to experience the freedom and joy that Cedric finds in flying. When they land, Hermione is exhilarated and grateful, touched that Cedric shared something so important to him in a way that made her feel safe rather than pressured. Hermione introduces Cedric to some of her favorite books, Muggle literature that he's never encountered. They read together sometimes, curled up in comfortable chairs with a blanket shared between them, occasionally reading passages aloud to each other. Cedric is fascinated by Muggle stories, by the way Muggle authors imagine and explain the world without magic. Through Hermione's eyes, he gains a deeper appreciation for Muggle culture and creativity, understanding that magic isn't the only form of wonder in the world. They also spend time working on SPEW together, with Cedric genuinely engaging with the cause. He helps Hermione refine her approach, suggesting that instead of trying to free all house elves immediately, which many elves don't even want, they focus on establishing basic rights and protections, ensuring fair treatment and the option to leave abusive situations. Hermione initially resists, wanting more radical change, but Cedric helps her see that incremental progress is better than no progress, that sometimes you have to work within existing systems to change them. This pragmatic approach, combined with Hermione's passionate idealism, makes their partnership effective. As the third task approaches, Hermione's anxiety reaches new heights. She's been researching everything she can about mazes, dark creatures, and possible enchantments, but there's so much they don't know. The maze is mysterious, deliberately kept secret, and that uncertainty terrifies her. She has nightmares about Cedric getting hurt, about the maze changing and trapping him, about losing him in a way she can't prevent. Cedric notices her increasing stress and tries to reassure her, but they both know that in a competition like this, danger is inherent and no amount of preparation can eliminate risk entirely. The night before the third task, they spend hours together in the room of requirement, which has provided them with a comfortable private space. They don't talk much, just hold each other, both aware that tomorrow everything could change. Cedric makes Hermione promise that if something happens to him, she'll continue fighting for the things she believes in, that she won't let grief stop her from being the incredible force for good that she is. Hermione makes him promise to be careful, to not take unnecessary risks, to come back to her. They both know these are promises that circumstances might make impossible to keep, but they make them anyway, needing the comfort of words even when they can't guarantee outcomes. Their last kiss before Cedric enters the maze is desperate and tender, full of unspoken fears and fierce love. Hermione watches him walk toward the entrance, his shoulders squared, his head held high, looking every inch the champion. She wants to run after him, to pull him back, to demand that he not go into that maze, but she doesn't. She respects his courage, his determination, his need to see this through. So she watches, and she waits, and she prays to any power that might be listening that he'll come back to her. The third task begins, and Hermione watches from the stands, gripping the railing so hard her knuckles turn white. Harry and Cedric disappear into the maze, followed by Crumb and Fleur at their appointed times. The crowd is excited, cheering and speculating, but Hermione can barely breathe. Time crawls by with agonizing slowness. The maze reveals nothing of what's happening inside, and the not knowing is torture. She tries to keep her mind occupied by talking to Ginny, who's sitting beside her offering silent support, but every second feels like an eternity. When Dumbledore suddenly stands, his face grave, and the crowd falls silent, Hermione's heart stops. Something has gone terribly wrong. The announcement comes that there's been an incident, that students are to return to their common rooms immediately, and Hermione refuses to move. She demands to know what happened, where Cedric is, her voice rising with panic. Professors try to guide students away, but Hermione pushes through, desperate for information, for any sign that Cedric is okay. Here's where our alternate timeline can take two very different paths, and both are worth exploring because they each reveal something profound about how this relationship would affect the broader story. In the first scenario, the tragic one, events unfold much as they did originally. Cedric and Harry reach the cup together, touch it simultaneously, and are portkeyed to the graveyard. Voldemort's resurrection proceeds as planned, and Cedric, that spare, is murdered with casual cruelty. When Harry returns with Cedric's body, Hermione's world shatters. She's standing there as Fleur and Crumb's screams join the general chaos, and she sees Cedric, lifeless, and something inside her breaks. She fights through the crowd, dropping to her knees beside his body. Her hands shake as she reaches out to touch him, his face still and pale, so wrong compared to the vibrant person she knew. She says his name, softly at first, then louder, as if her voice could somehow call him back. But he doesn't respond, doesn't move, and the reality crashes over her in waves. She screams, a raw, primal sound of anguish that cuts through the chaos around them. Harry is there, traumatized and guilt-ridden, trying to explain what happened, but Hermione barely hears him. All she can see is Cedric, gone, stolen from her by a monster she's been fighting against, stolen from the world that needed his goodness and light. The aftermath of Cedric's death in this timeline is different because Hermione was so deeply connected to him. In the original story, Cho Chang's grief was profound, but happened somewhat off-page. Hermione's mourning would be front and center, affecting Harry and Ron directly. She blames herself, thinking if only she'd researched more, prepared him better, warned him more strongly. Harry, dealing with his own trauma and guilt, tries to tell her it wasn't her fault, that Cedric made his own choices, but Hermione can't hear it. She's lost in grief and what-ifs, replaying every moment they had together, searching for something she could have done differently. The days following Cedric's death are a blur for Hermione. She doesn't eat, barely sleeps, moves through the world like a ghost. She sits through his memorial service, surrounded by people who are also grieving, but can't possibly understand the depth of her loss. Amos Diggory breaks down completely during the service, and Hermione feels a terrible connection to his pain, understanding it from the inside. She wants to comfort him but can't find words adequate to the situation. What can you say to a father who's lost his son? What comfort is there when someone so good, so young, so full of potential is ripped away? Hermione speaks at the memorial, though she almost can't get through it. She talks about Cedric's kindness, his integrity, his brilliant mind that people often overlooked because they were distracted by his other qualities. She talks about how he made her feel valued and understood, how he believed in fighting for what was right even when it was difficult. Her voice breaks multiple times and tears stream down her face, but she pushes through because Cedric deserves to be remembered fully, not just as the boy who died, but as the person he was. When she finishes, she can barely make it back to her seat before collapsing into sobs. The end of the school year is brutal. Everywhere Hermione looks, she sees reminders of Cedric. The library table where they first really talked. The path around the lake where they took morning walks. The spot in the winter garden where they first kissed. Hogwarts, which has always been her sanctuary, becomes a place haunted by memories. She considers not coming back for 5th year, but ultimately decides she can't let grief derail her education, that Cedric would want her to continue, to keep learning and growing and preparing to fight the darkness that took him. The summer after Cedric's death is the worst period of Hermione's life. She's back with her parents, who are worried and unsure how to help their daughter through this grief. They never got to meet Cedric, only heard about him through Hermione's letters, and now they watch her mourn someone they'll never know. Hermione spends hours in her room, reading and rereading the letters Cedric wrote her, touching the small gifts he gave her, a Hufflepuff badge he'd worn, a book of poetry he'd annotated with his thoughts. These physical reminders are both comforting and agonizing, proof that he existed, that what they had was real, but also stark reminders that he's gone. She visits the Diggorys regularly that summer, despite the pain it causes. Amos and Mrs. Diggory cling to her as the last connection to their son. She shares stories about Cedric, shows them the notes he wrote her, the small tokens of their relationship. It's painful for all of them, but it's also healing in a way. The Diggorys see how much their son was loved, how happy he was in his last months, and that brings them some comfort. Hermione finds that helping them process their grief helps her process her own, that keeping Cedric's memory alive gives her purpose when everything else feels meaningless. This loss fundamentally changes Hermione's approach to the war against Voldemort. Her determination to fight, to prepare, to never be caught unprepared again, becomes almost obsessive. When she pushes for Dumbledore's army, it's not just about practical defense training, it's personal. Every spell she masters, every strategy she develops, is driven by the memory of Cedric and the promise she makes to herself that no one else will die because she wasn't ready enough, didn't know enough, didn't do enough. Her grief becomes her fuel, making her even more formidable but also more reckless with her own safety. During the DA meetings, Hermione pushes herself and others harder than Harry sometimes thinks is necessary. She's preparing them not just for theoretical danger, but for real combat, for facing Death Eaters and dark creatures and the possibility of death. Some students find her intensity intimidating, but others recognize it for what it is. Fierce determination that everyone she cares about will have the skills to survive what's coming. When she demonstrates spells, there's a precision and power to her magic that wasn't there before, forged in the crucible of loss and rage at the injustice of Cedric's death. Ron, for all his earlier jealousy, steps up in a way that shows real growth. He's there for Hermione in her grief, not trying to insert himself romantically but genuinely supporting his friend. He sits with her when she cries, helps her with research when she's too exhausted to focus, and gradually their friendship heals and strengthens. He never badmouths Cedric or suggests she should move on, which Hermione appreciates more than she can express. This tragedy, terrible as it is, makes Ron mature faster, understanding that some things are more important than his own hurt feelings. The dynamic between Harry and Hermione also shifts. Harry already felt guilty about Cedric's death, but knowing that Cedric was with Hermione, seeing her devastation, makes that guilt cut even deeper. He becomes more protective of Hermione, more determined to keep his remaining friends safe. When Sirius dies the following year, Harry and Hermione understand each other's grief in a profound way. They've both lost someone they loved because of Voldemort, and this shared trauma bonds them even more tightly. They don't need to explain the nightmares, the sudden waves of grief that hit at unexpected moments, the anger that has no outlet. they just understand. Hermione channels her grief into action in multiple ways. She throws herself into her studies with even more intensity than before, as if knowledge itself can be armor against future loss. She becomes more involved in resistance efforts, taking risks that make Harry and Ron worry about her. She's not suicidal, but she's lost her fear of death in a way that's both empowering and dangerous. When she faces Death Eaters, there's a cold fury in her that makes even experienced dark wizards hesitate. She's fighting not just for victory but for vengeance, and that makes her unpredictable. Her relationship with the Order of the Phoenix is complicated by her grief. Some members, like Moody and Tonks, respect her newfound hardness, recognizing a fellow warrior who's been shaped by loss. Others, like Mrs. Weasley, worry that she's too young to carry such weight, that grief has made her reckless. Hermione doesn't particularly care what they think. She's past the point of seeking approval or permission. She knows what needs to be done, and she's going to do it regardless of whether adults think she's ready. As the war intensifies, Hermione fights with Cedric's memory as a constant companion. She wears the Hufflepuff badge he gave her under her robes, a small token that no one else sees but that she can feel against her heart, a reminder of what she's fighting for. When she's making difficult decisions, destroying Horcruxes, lying to protect her friends, she thinks about what Cedric would do, how his sense of honor and fairness would guide him. She tries to balance her ruthless practical side with his moral compass, and it makes her a better strategist and a better person. The Horcrux hunt is grueling, and grief is a constant companion alongside danger and desperation. When they're cold and hungry and hopeless in that tent, Hermione thinks about Cedric constantly. She wonders what he'd say if he could see her now, whether he'd be proud of her determination or worried about how hard she's become. She talks to him sometimes in her mind, updating him on their progress, asking for strength when hers falters. It's not healthy, probably, this constant dialogue with someone who's gone, but it keeps her going when nothing else can. Ron's departure, when he abandons them under the influence of the locket, hits Hermione hard in a different way than it would have if she hadn't already lost Cedric. She's learned that people you love can be ripped away suddenly, without warning, and Ron choosing to leave feels like another abandonment, another loss. When he comes back, the reconciliation is complicated by her grief-hardened heart. She eventually forgives him, but something has changed in her, a wariness that wasn't there before, a knowledge that the people you love most can hurt you most deeply, whether they mean to or not. The Battle of Hogwarts brings everything to a terrible climax. Hermione fights with the fury of someone who has nothing left to lose, dueling Death Eaters with skill that shocks even her allies. She thinks about Cedric as she fights, about how he died in a graveyard far from help, murdered by a coward's spell. She thinks about all the other people who've died since then, all the unnecessary loss and pain and grief, and she channels it all into her magic. Every spell she casts carries the weight of her rage and her sorrow and her determination that Voldemort's evil ends here. Tonight, no matter the cost. When they finally destroy the final Horcrux, when Harry defeats Voldemort once and for all, Hermione doesn't feel the triumph she expected. There's relief, yes, and satisfaction that they succeeded, but also a hollow emptiness. Winning doesn't bring Cedric back. It doesn't undo any of the losses they've suffered. Victory is important, necessary, but it's not the healing balm she hoped it would be. The war is over, but her grief remains, and now she has to figure out how to live in a world without immediate danger, without the constant adrenaline and purpose that's been driving her for years. The eventual victory over Voldemort is bittersweet for Hermione. Yes, they've won, but Cedric isn't there to see it. She's lost count of the times during the Horcrux hunt that she wished she could talk to him, get his perspective, feel his steadying presence. At the victory celebration, when everyone is rejoicing, Hermione slips away to visit Cedric's grave. She tells him it's over, that they did it, that he can rest now. It's a private moment of closure, acknowledging that while she'll always love him and carry him with her, she has to find a way to live fully again. In the years after the war, Hermione doesn't rush into another relationship. She focuses on her career at the Ministry, pushing for the reforms she and Cedric talked about, including improved magical creature rights and educational reforms. Every piece of legislation she helps pass, every positive change she effects feels like a tribute to Cedric's memory, proof that his death wasn't meaningless, that the world he wanted to see is slowly becoming real. She works tirelessly, maybe too much, using work as a way to avoid dealing with her grief fully, but also genuinely believing in the causes she fights for. Years pass before Hermione is ready to even consider dating again. When she eventually does open her heart again, it's to someone who understands that Cedric will always be a part of her story, her first love, and a formative relationship that shaped who she became. Maybe it's Ron, after years of friendship and growth, after he's proven himself reliable and mature, after they've both done the work of healing from their respective traumas. Maybe it's someone else entirely, someone she meets at the ministry or through her advocacy work, someone who sees her grief not as damage to be fixed, but as evidence of her capacity for deep love. Whoever it eventually is accepts that Hermione loved deeply once and lost terribly, and that experience made her both stronger and more compassionate. They don't expect her to forget Cedric or stop honoring his memory. On significant dates, Cedric's birthday or the anniversary of his death, they give her space to grieve without making her feel guilty for it. They understand that you can love someone who's gone and still have room in your heart for new love, that these things aren't mutually exclusive. When Hermione eventually marries, if she does, there are small touches throughout the ceremony that honor Cedric. Maybe a yellow flower in her bouquet for Hufflepuff. Maybe a reading of a poem he once shared with her. Nothing ostentatious, just quiet acknowledgments that he was important, that he shaped who she is, that his memory is blessed. Her new partner understands this isn't about comparison or competition. It's about honoring all the pieces of Hermione's journey that made her the person they fell in love with. If Hermione has children, she tells them about Cedric when they're old enough to understand. She shares stories about his kindness, his courage, his belief in fairness, and doing what's right. She explains that sometimes good people die too young, that life isn't always fair, but that we honor them by living according to the values they believed in. Her children grow up understanding that their mother loved someone before their other parent, that grief is part of life, and that remembering those we've lost is important. But let's explore the other path. The one where Hermione's preparation and love make a difference in the outcome. What if in this timeline, Hermione's exhaustive research uncovers something crucial? She's been reading everything about past Triwizard tournaments, obscure magical artifacts, and portkeys. The night before the third task, something clicks in her mind, a pattern she hadn't noticed before. She remembers reading about illegal portkeys, how they feel different, how there are detection spells that can reveal unauthorized magical objects. She's been so focused on preparing Cedric for what might be in the maze that she hasn't thought about the cup itself, but suddenly it seems obvious. If someone wanted to harm the champions, tampering with the cup would be an effective method. She runs to find Dumbledore, breathless with urgency, and explains her theory that the cup might have been tampered with. At first, Dumbledore seems inclined to dismiss her concerns as pre-competition anxiety, but Hermione is insistent, laying out her reasoning with her usual logical precision. Dumbledore, always willing to listen to clever students, especially when they present well-reasoned arguments, agrees to examine the cup. He takes her concerns seriously in a way that validates all of Hermione's research and preparation. Using advanced detection spells, he discovers she's right. There's dark magic on the cup, an unauthorized portkey that would transport whoever touched it to an unknown location. The tournament is immediately suspended while an investigation is launched. Mad-Eye Moody, actually Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise, realizes his plan is unraveling and tries to escape, but Dumbledore and Snape are ready. The imposter is caught, the real Moody is rescued from his trunk, and Voldemort's resurrection plot is foiled, at least temporarily. Cedric survives, but it's a near thing. If Hermione had waited even one more day to voice her concerns, if Dumbledore had dismissed her, if any number of small things had gone differently, he would have been killed. When Cedric learns that Hermione literally saved his life, the depth of his gratitude and love is overwhelming. He seeks her out immediately after the investigation concludes and just holds her, both of them shaking with the knowledge of how close they came to disaster. Cedric tells her she's incredible, that her brilliant mind and refusal to ignore her instincts saved him and probably Harry too. This victory, though, comes with its own complications. Voldemort is still out there, his servant is captured, and now he knows they're aware of his plans. The Ministry can't deny his return quite so easily with a Death Eater caught red-handed at Hogwarts, attempting to kidnap Harry Potter through an illegal portkey. Fudge is forced to acknowledge the threat, which means the wizarding world prepares for war earlier than in the original timeline. This has massive implications for how the next few years unfold. The immediate aftermath of foiling the plot creates chaos at Hogwarts. The tournament is suspended indefinitely, with both Cedric and Harry declared joint winners since they reached the cup location first. There's an inquiry into how Barty Crouch Jr. managed to impersonate Moody for an entire year, how he got past Dumbledore's security, how no one noticed. Hermione testifies about her research and her decision to bring her concerns to Dumbledore, becoming somewhat of a hero herself in the process. Though the attention makes her uncomfortable, Cedric, having graduated from Hogwarts, faces a choice about his future. In the original timeline, this choice was taken from him. Now he has to decide who he wants to be in the coming conflict. His father wants him to join the Ministry, to pursue a safe career path that keeps him out of danger, especially after coming so close to death. But Cedric knows he can't stand aside while others fight. The experience of nearly being kidnapped and knowing what fate awaited him has crystallized his resolve. He joins the Order of the Phoenix despite his youth, because Dumbledore recognizes his courage, skill, and the unique perspective he brings as someone who was targeted by Voldemort's plot. This decision terrifies Hermione, who just saved his life only to watch him volunteer for dangerous missions. They have their first serious fight about it, Hermione arguing that he's being reckless, that he's just graduated and shouldn't throw his life away. Cedric argues that he can't ask others to fight while he stays safe, that he has skills and knowledge that can help, that sometimes doing the right thing means accepting risk. They're both crying by the end of the argument, and finally Hermione acknowledges that she understands, that she'd make the same choice in his position, but that doesn't make it any less terrifying. They reconcile with the understanding that they're both going to do dangerous things in the coming war, and they have to trust each other and support each other, rather than trying to keep each other safe at the cost of their principles. Their relationship now has to navigate the reality of war. Hermione is still at Hogwarts for her 5th, 6th, and 7th years while Cedric is out in the world, working for the Order. They write constantly, using enchanted parchment that only they can read, sharing their fears and hopes in small moments of normalcy. The letters become lifelines for both of them. Hermione tells Cedric about her classes, about the increasingly restrictive environment at Hogwarts as Umbridge takes over, about forming Dumbledore's army. Cedric shares what he can about Order missions without compromising security, tells her about the people he's working with, admits when he's scared or doubting himself. When Cedric can visit Hogsmeade, Hermione meets him, and they treasure those brief hours together. The meetings are bittersweet, wonderful to be together, but painful, because they know they have to separate again. They find private places to talk, to hold each other, to remind themselves why they're fighting. Sometimes they don't talk much at all, just sit together in comfortable silence, the presence of the other person enough. These moments keep them going through the darkest times, giving them something to fight for beyond abstract ideals, making the war personal in a way that strengthens their resolve. Cedric becomes an important ally to Harry in a different way than in the original timeline. As a member of the Order, he provides insight into what the adults are planning and doing, serving as a bridge between the student world and the Order. He respects Harry's role and capabilities in a way that some of the older Order members don't, having witnessed Harry's courage and skill firsthand during the tournament. When Harry is struggling with Dumbledore's secrecy and feeling shut out, Cedric is someone he can talk to, someone who validates his feelings while also helping him see the adult's perspective. This friendship also strengthens the bond between Harry and Hermione. They're united in their worry about Cedric, in their appreciation for the risks he's taking. Harry sometimes acts as a messenger between Hermione and Cedric when regular letters are too risky, and he never abuses that trust, never reads their private communications, never uses his access to information to make Hermione feel guilty or worried. It's a sign of Harry's growth and his genuine affection for both of them that he supports their relationship, even when it's clearly causing them both pain through the separation. The formation of Dumbledore's army takes on additional significance with Cedric's survival. He occasionally visits Hogwarts to help train the DA, sneaking in through passages he learned about as a student. His presence makes the threat more real for the students. Here's someone just a few years older than most of them, already fighting in a real war, treating them as future soldiers rather than children to be protected. Cedric's training is more intense than what they'd get from Harry alone, pushing them harder but also building their confidence. He teaches them not just spells but strategy, how to think in combat situations, how to protect each other, how to make hard choices under pressure. During these training sessions, Cedric and Hermione work together in a way that's beautiful to watch. They complement each other perfectly, Hermione's theoretical knowledge combining with Cedric's practical combat experience. They demonstrate partnered defense techniques, showing the students how to coordinate with allies, how to communicate non-verbally in dangerous situations. The students pick up on the trust between them, the way they move in sync, and it becomes an inspiring example of what partnership can look like. Umbridge's regime at Hogwarts is even more oppressive in this timeline, partly because the Ministry is more overtly acknowledging Voldemort's return, but also desperately trying to control the narrative and prevent panic. When Hermione is caught and threatened with expulsion for her involvement with DA, Cedric is furious. He wants to storm Hogwarts and extract her, but Dumbledore counsels patience, reminding him that Hermione is clever enough to handle Umbridge and that dramatic action might make things worse. Still, knowing that Hermione is in direct danger and he can't protect her is torture for Cedric, making him understand viscerally what Hermione feels when he's on missions. When Hermione and her friends go to the Department of Mysteries to rescue Sirius, Cedric is part of the Order response team. He arrives just in time to see Hermione hit by Dolohof's curse, falling like a broken doll, and his terror in that moment is absolute. He fights his way to her, protecting her unconscious body from further attacks while the battle rages around them. When she wakes in the hospital wing later, bandaged and in pain but alive, Cedric is sitting beside her bed, looking like he hasn't slept in days. They don't need to speak, just hold hands, both aware that they could have lost each other again. This near miss makes them both reevaluate their priorities. They've been so focused on the war, on doing what's right, that they haven't fully acknowledged how much they need each other. They have a long conversation about their future, about what they want beyond just surviving the war. Cedric tells Hermione he wants to marry her someday, when the war is over, when they can make plans without death hanging over them. Hermione, usually so practical, admits she wants that too, wants a life with him that isn't defined by conflict and danger. Hermione's 6th year is difficult. Cedric is increasingly involved in dangerous Order missions, and the wait between letters gets longer and more agonizing. Hermione throws herself into her studies and into helping Harry investigate Voldemort's past, but worry is a constant companion. She starts wearing a charmed bracelet that Cedric gave her, which warms slightly when he's thinking of her, a small connection across distance that brings comfort. When the bracelet goes cold for days, she knows he's on a mission that requires magical silence. And those are the worst times, the not knowing, the imagining worst-case scenarios. During the Battle of the Astronomy Tower, when Dumbledore is killed, Cedric is there fighting alongside the Order. He and Hermione find each other in the chaos. And there's a moment where they just look at each other, both aware of how easily either of them could die, both terrified and determined. They fight together, protecting students and fellow Order members, and they both survive the night. But Dumbledore's death is a devastating blow. At the funeral, they stand together, Hermione leaning on Cedric for support, both mourning the loss of a great wizard and feeling unmoored by the knowledge that the war is entering its final, most dangerous phase. Hermione's decision to go on the Horcrux hunt with Harry and Ron is complicated by her relationship with Cedric. Leaving him, going into hiding without reliable communication, feels like abandoning him. But she knows Harry needs her, that destroying the Horcruxes is crucial to defeating Voldemort. Cedric, understanding the importance of the mission even without knowing all the details, supports her decision even though it kills him to let her go. Their goodbye is wrenching, both aware they might never see each other again, both trying to memorize every detail of the other's face, every sensation of being held by the person they love most. On the Horcrux hunt, Hermione's worry about Cedric is a constant undercurrent. She doesn't talk about it much, not wanting to burden Harry and Ron with her fears. But at night when she's supposed to be sleeping, she thinks about him constantly. Is he alive? Is he safe? Does he think about her as much as she thinks about him? The charmed bracelet stops working after a few weeks, the distance and magical protections around their location severing the connection. And that's even worse, the complete absence of information about how he is. When Ron leaves under the influence of the locket, His jealous rant includes references to Cedric, suggesting that Hermione probably wishes Ron was more like perfect Cedric Diggory, that she probably regrets bringing Ron along instead of Cedric. Hermione, exhausted and heartsick, snaps back with uncharacteristic cruelty, telling Ron that Cedric would never abandon his friends, that his jealousy is pathetic and childish. The fight is ugly and painful, and after Ron disapparates, Hermione breaks down crying, apologizing to Harry, hating the locket for bringing out the worst in all of them, missing Cedric with an ache that's physical. When Ron returns, the reconciliation is complicated. Hermione is still hurt by his abandonment and his cruel words, but she's also aware of the locket's influence, aware that Ron came back and saved Harry's life. She forgives him, but something has shifted in their dynamic. The easy camaraderie from earlier years is gone, replaced by a more wary, tested friendship that's stronger for having survived betrayal but also more careful, more aware of how easily things can fall apart. The Battle of Hogwarts brings everything to a terrible climax. Cedric fights in the battle, of course, leading a team of Order members and experienced wizards against the Death Eater forces. When Hermione returns to the castle with Harry and Ron, fresh from destroying the final Horcrux at Gringotts, she doesn't know if Cedric is even alive. The battle is already in full swing, chaos and violence everywhere, and she fights with desperate fury, part of her trying to find Cedric, part of her terrified of what she might discover. They find each other in the midst of chaos during a brief lull in the fighting. Cedric is bleeding from a cut on his forehead, exhausted and battered but alive. Hermione runs to him, and they collide in an embrace that's equal parts relief and desperation. There's no time for a proper reunion, but they exchange a few whispered words, promises to survive this, affirmations of love that might be their last chance to say them. Then they're fighting side by side, moving in sync, covering each other's blind spots, the trust and connection between them evident in every movement. When Voldemort calls for a pause, demanding Harry surrender, Hermione and Cedric are separated by the crowd. Hermione wants to go with Harry, to support him, but Cedric holds her back, knowing that Harry has to face this alone, that their presence would only put them in danger without helping Harry. When Harry walks into the forest, Hermione cries in Cedric's arms, both of them believing they're watching their friend walk to his death, both feeling helpless and heartbroken. Harry's apparent death devastates everyone, but the revelation that he survived, that Voldemort can be defeated, reignites their determination. In the final battle, when Voldemort falls and the war is finally truly over, Hermione and Cedric find each other again. This time, their embrace is different, tinged with disbelief that they actually survived, that the nightmare is over, that they have a future to look forward to. They hold each other and cry, releasing years of accumulated fear and grief and stress, letting themselves feel everything they've been suppressing to survive. The aftermath of the war is complicated for both of them. They both survive, which is more than many can say, but they're both changed by the experience. They have nightmares and flashbacks, moments where loud noises make them reach for wands, times when they wake up terrified that the peace isn't real. They lean on each other through the difficult process of healing, patient with each other's trauma responses, understanding when one of them needs space or comfort or distraction. Cedric and Hermione don't rush into marriage, despite their earlier talk of wanting that. They need time to figure out who they are in peacetime, to heal enough that they're not just two traumatized people clinging to each other, but two whole individuals choosing to build a life together. They spend the first year after the war just dating normally, going to dinner, taking walks, having conversations that aren't about life or death, relearning how to be together without the constant pressure of war hanging over them. When Cedric does propose, it's simple and perfect. They're on a walk around the lake at Hogwarts, which has been rebuilt and reopened. They're talking about their plans, Hermione's work at the Ministry, and Cedric's position training new Aurors. And Cedric just stops walking and says that he wants to spend the rest of his life doing this, talking with her about everything and nothing, building a future together. Hermione says yes without hesitation, and they sit by the lake for hours, making plans and dreaming about the life they're going to create. Their wedding is a celebration mixing wizard and muggle traditions, held on the Hogwarts grounds with McGonagall's blessing. The entire surviving DA attends, along with Order members and friends from Cedric's time at Hogwarts. Harry is Cedric's best man, a fitting symbol of their friendship and everything they've survived together. Ginny is Hermione's maid of honor, and Ron stands with the groomsmen, having finally made peace with Hermione's choice and genuinely happy for his friends. The ceremony is simple but elegant, focusing on the commitment they're making. When they exchange vows, both of them crying, there's not a dry eye in the audience, everyone aware of what these two survived to reach this moment. The wedding reception is joyful in a way that feels almost miraculous after so much loss. People dance and laugh and celebrate, honoring not just Hermione and Cedric, but everyone who survived, everyone who sacrificed, everyone who fought for this moment to be possible. There are toasts that are funny and touching, stories about Hermione and Cedric from their years at Hogwarts. Luna gives a characteristically odd but sweet speech about how Hermione and Cedric's auras create a perfect harmony. Ron's speech is surprisingly emotional, talking about how Cedric makes Hermione happy in ways Ron never could have, and how he's grateful to Cedric for being exactly who Hermione needed. Their honeymoon is in France, a place neither of them has spent much time, but that holds no traumatic memories. Somewhere they can just be tourists and newlyweds, without the weight of their past. They visit magical and muggle sites, eat wonderful food, speak terrible French, and laugh more than they have in years. They spend lazy mornings in bed talking about nothing and everything, afternoons exploring beautiful places, evenings enjoying each other's company. It's healing in ways they didn't know they needed, this permission to just be happy, to enjoy life without guilt or fear. When they return to England, they buy a house together, something that's theirs, neutral territory that isn't connected to war or loss. They decorate it to reflect both of them, books everywhere for Hermione, but also Cedric's Quidditch memorabilia, comfortable furniture that invites lounging, a garden that Cedric starts cultivating. It becomes a sanctuary, a place where they can decompress after difficult days at work, where they can be completely themselves without performance or pretense. Their professional lives flourish as they settle into peacetime. Hermione works at the Ministry, starting in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, where she pushes for reforms she's been planning for years. She works on legislation to improve house elf conditions, establish legal protections for werewolves, create better relationships between wizards and other magical beings. It's slow, often frustrating work, navigating ministry bureaucracy and entrenched prejudices. But she's relentless and strategic, using everything she learned during the war about how to fight effectively. Cedric works as an Auror trainer, teaching the next generation of dark wizard fighters. He's good at it, patient and encouraging while also demanding excellence. His students respect him not just because he's skilled, but because he treats them as individuals, understanding that everyone has different strengths and approaches to magic. He emphasizes ethics and restraint alongside combat skills, teaching his students that power without judgment is dangerous, that the mark of a good Auror is knowing when not to use force as much as knowing how to use it effectively. Together, they become known at the Ministry as a formidable team. When Hermione identifies unjust laws or policies, Cedric helps her navigate the political landscape, using his connections and his understanding of how the system works. When Cedric encounters resistance to his training methods or sees systemic problems in how Aurors operate, Hermione helps him develop policy proposals and arguments that are hard to dismiss. They're not the same in their approaches. Hermione more confrontational and Cedric more diplomatic, but that difference makes them effective, able to attack problems from multiple angles. They host gatherings at their home regularly, Sunday dinners where friends are always welcome. Harry and Ginny come with their growing family. Ron, whether he's eventually with someone or still single, is a regular attendee. Neville brings interesting plants from Hogwarts where he's teaching herbology. Luna shows up with tales of fantastic creatures she's been tracking. These gatherings become tradition, a way for their friend group to stay connected, to support each other through the ongoing work of building lives after trauma. When Hermione and Cedric decide to have children, it's a decision they make carefully, talking through their fears and hopes. They both worry about bringing children into a world that can be so dangerous, but they also believe in building the future they fought for. Their first child is a daughter, and they name her something meaningful but not burdensome, a name that honors the past without defining her by it. They're attentive, loving parents, learning as they go, making mistakes and correcting them, creating a home full of warmth and laughter. Their parenting philosophy blends their values beautifully. They encourage their children to be curious and question things, to stand up for what's right, to value people for their character rather than their blood status or house. They read to their children every night, both Muggle and wizarding stories, teaching them to appreciate both worlds. They take them to museums and Quidditch matches, expose them to art and music and nature, wanting them to be well-rounded and thoughtful. When their children go to Hogwarts, Hermione and Cedric are nervous but excited. They've prepared their kids as much as possible, but they also understand that Hogwarts is where children find themselves, figure out who they are beyond their parents' shadows. Their oldest is sorted into Ravenclaw, drawn to learning and creativity. Their second child ends up in Hufflepuff, embodying loyalty and kindness in ways that make Cedric's eyes water with pride. If they have a third, that child might end up in Gryffindor or even Slytherin, and Hermione and Cedric would handle any house placement with grace, teaching their children that houses are communities, not destinies. The children grow up hearing stories about the war, age-appropriate versions that become more complete as they get older. They learn about their parents' courage, about the people who died fighting for a better world, about why it's important to stand against injustice, even when it's difficult. They also hear stories about Hogwarts before the war, about the Triwizard Tournament where their parents met, about the early days of their relationship. These stories shape the children's understanding of love and courage, teaching them that the two are often intertwined. As years pass, Hermione and Cedric's legacy extends beyond their own family. The reforms Hermione champions change the wizarding world materially, improving lives for magical creatures and Muggle-borns. The Aurors that Cedric trains are known for their ethics and skill, changing the culture of that department. Together, they represent what's possible when good people survive war and use their experience to build something better rather than just recovering from trauma. They age together, their love deepening and evolving with time. The intensity of their early relationship, forged in danger and heightened by the possibility of loss, matures into something steadier but no less profound. They develop routines and traditions, inside jokes and shared references that span decades. They support each other through career challenges and personal losses, through raising children and eventually becoming grandparents. The physical passion of youth evolves into a comfortable intimacy, knowing each other's bodies and minds so thoroughly that words are often unnecessary. In their old age, they look back on their lives with satisfaction and some amazement that they made it this far. So many of their generation didn't survive the war, didn't get the chance to build families and careers and normal, beautiful lives. They honor that luck and that loss by living fully, by continuing to fight for justice even when it's less dramatic than defeating Dark Lords, by showing younger generations that hope and love are worth the risk. The story of Hermione Granger and Cedric Diggory, whether it ends in tragedy or triumph, resonates because it speaks to fundamental human experiences. How do we love when the future is uncertain? How do we honor those we've lost while still living fully? How do we balance personal happiness with responsibility to something larger than ourselves? These questions don't have easy answers, which is what makes exploring them through these characters so compelling. In the tragic timeline, we see how loss can be transformed into purpose, how grief can fuel determination without consuming the person who grieves. Hermione's journey after Cedric's death shows that you can carry loss with you and still build a meaningful life, that the people we love shape us even after they're gone. Her eventual healing, her ability to open her heart again while never forgetting her first love, demonstrates the resilience of the human spirit and the truth that love isn't diminished by being shared across time or people. In the survival timeline, we see how love can be a source of strength through impossible circumstances, how partnership makes both people stronger without diminishing either. Cedric and Hermione's relationship shows what happens when two capable, principled people choose each other and build a life based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. Their ability to weather war and trauma together, to support each other through the worst experiences imaginable and come out stronger, speaks to the power of committed partnership. Both timelines explore courage in its many forms. Not just the physical bravery of facing dark wizards, but the emotional courage of opening your heart when loss is possible, of continuing to fight for what's right when it would be easier to give up, of building hope in the midst of darkness. Hermione and Cedric, individually and together, embody different aspects of courage, showing that it's not a single trait, but a constellation of choices to do what's right, even when it's terrifying. The relationship also serves as a lens to examine privilege, prejudice, and the possibility of change in the wizarding world. Cedric, from a traditional wizarding family, choosing to love Hermione and actively working to understand and combat the prejudice she faces, represents the kind of allyship that creates real change. He doesn't just passively not be prejudiced, he actively educates himself, uses his privilege to amplify Hermione's voice and causes, stands beside her in fights that don't directly affect him. This aspect of their relationship models what it looks like when people from different backgrounds build authentic connection and work together toward justice. For fans who ship Hermione and Cedric, the appeal often lies in the combination of intellectual compatibility, mutual respect, and the poignancy of their story. There's something deeply romantic about a bright, determined girl and a noble, kind boy finding each other and choosing each other despite all the obstacles, whether those obstacles ultimately prove insurmountable or not. In a series filled with chosen ones and prophecies and destiny, their relationship is purely choice. Two people deciding they want to be together because they make each other better and happier. And that's powerful. The age difference, while notable, becomes less significant as both mature, and by the time any real romantic development occurs, it feels natural rather than inappropriate. More important than the 2-year age gap is their fundamental compatibility in terms of values, intellect, and temperament. They challenge each other in productive ways, support each other's growth, and maintain their individual identities while building something together. That's the mark of a healthy relationship at any age. What makes this alternate timeline so rich for exploration is that it doesn't require fundamentally changing either character to make it work. Hermione remains brilliant, passionate about justice, sometimes abrasive, deeply loyal, and incredibly brave. Cedric remains noble, kind, skilled, strategic, and fundamentally good. They fit together because of who they authentically are, not despite it. Their relationship enhances both of them, bringing out new facets of their personalities while staying true to their core selves. The story of Hermione Granger and Cedric Diggory, in all its possible variations, ultimately asks us to consider what love means in the context of war and loss, how we build lives worth living in the face of darkness, and how we honor both the people we've lost and the future they died to protect. Whether their story is long or heartbreakingly brief, whether it ends in grief or eventual joy, it's a story about choosing love even when it's risky, about standing up for what's right even when it's hard, and about the ways we're shaped by the people who see us truly and value us completely. Looking deeper into the survival timeline, their post-war years would be filled with both beautiful moments and difficult challenges. The transition from war to peace is never as simple as just being grateful to be alive. Both Hermione and Cedric would struggle with survivor's guilt, wondering why they made it when so many others didn't. They'd have conversations late at night when neither can sleep, talking about Fred Weasley, Remus Lupin, Tonks, Colin Creevey, and countless others who didn't get to see the peace they fought for. These conversations would sometimes lead to tears, sometimes to renewed determination to make their sacrifices mean something, and sometimes just to holding each other in the darkness. Their house would become a gathering place for other war survivors, a space where people could talk about their experiences without judgment or expectation. They'd host informal support groups, nothing official, just friends coming together to share their struggles and victories. Neville would talk about his nightmares, about seeing his grandmother's face when she heard he might not survive. Luna would share her unique perspective on loss and healing, talking about how grief is like having an invisible creature following you that occasionally makes itself known. These gatherings would be therapeutic for everyone involved, creating a community of people who understand what it's like to carry trauma while trying to build normal lives. Hermione's work at the Ministry would face significant opposition from old guard wizards who resist change. She'd encounter bureaucrats who pay lip service to reform while actively undermining her efforts, politicians who use progressive language for votes while maintaining the status quo, and outright bigots who make no secret of their disdain for a muggle-born telling them how to run things. There would be days when she'd come home furious and frustrated, ranting to Cedric about the absurdity of it all, the glacial pace of change, the hypocrisy she encounters. Cedric would listen, validate her feelings, and then help her strategize about how to outmaneuver her opponents. One particularly difficult battle would be over werewolf rights. Hermione would propose legislation to prohibit discrimination in employment and housing based on lycanthropy, to ensure access to Wolfsbane potion, and to establish legal protections against the kind of prejudice that destroyed lives like Remus Lupin's. The opposition would be fierce, with opponents using fear-mongering about dangerous beasts living among them, conveniently forgetting that wizards can be far more dangerous than werewolves when they choose to be. Hermione would work tirelessly to build coalitions, to educate the public, to share stories of werewolves who are simply people dealing with a medical condition. Cedric would support her efforts by training Aurors to handle werewolf-related incidents with compassion and appropriate force rather than excessive violence. He'd bring in guest speakers, werewolves who could talk about their experiences, helping his trainees see them as people rather than monsters. Some of his superiors would push back, arguing that he's making Aurors soft, but Cedric would stand firm, pointing out that good judgment and proportional response make for better law enforcement than shoot-first mentality. His reputation and his connections would protect him from serious consequences, but it would create tension that he'd have to navigate carefully. The legislation would eventually pass, but only after years of work and significant compromises that Hermione would find frustrating. She'd have to accept partial victories, incremental progress, rather than the sweeping change she wanted. Cedric would help her see that progress is still progress, that the perfect is the enemy of the good, that the people benefiting from even limited protections would have their lives materially improved. It would be a lesson in the long game of social change, in the patience required to shift entrenched systems, and in celebrating wins even when they feel insufficient. Their relationship would deepen through these shared struggles. They'd develop rituals for dealing with hard days, ways of supporting each other that become second nature. When Hermione has a particularly bad day, Cedric knows to make her favorite tea, run her a bath, and give her space to decompress before talking. When Cedric is dealing with stress from work, Hermione knows he needs physical activity, so she'd suggest a walk or even join him for a flight, despite her usual anxiety about heights. They'd learn each other's stress signals, the subtle shifts in tone or posture that indicate one of them is struggling, and they'd intervene with gentle care before things escalate. Their intimate life would evolve as they grow more comfortable with each other. The desperate, intense physicality of their early relationship during wartime would soften into something more playful and relaxed, though no less passionate. They'd learn what brings each other pleasure, what makes the other person laugh during intimate moments, what creates connection beyond just physical release. Their bedroom would be a space of vulnerability and trust, where they could be completely themselves without performance or pretense. They'd talk during and after, sharing thoughts and feelings, making requests and checking in with each other, building the kind of sexual communication that makes a partnership stronger. When they decide to try for their first child, it would be a decision weighted with hope and fear. Hermione would worry about taking time off work, about whether the wizarding world is safe enough, about whether she'd be a good mother given her own workaholic tendencies. Cedric would worry about being able to protect his family, about whether he can be the kind of father his own dad was to him, about balancing his dangerous job with family responsibilities. They'd talk through these fears together, ultimately deciding that they can't let fear rule their lives, that bringing new life into the world is an act of hope and faith in the future they fought for. Hermione's pregnancy would be both wonderful and challenging. She'd be fascinated by the magical aspects of carrying a magical child, reading every book she could find about magical prenatal development. She'd also be frustrated by the physical limitations, the way pregnancy makes her tired and emotional in ways she's not accustomed to. Cedric would be attentive and amazed, talking to her growing belly, already bonding with their child before birth. He'd accompany her to every healer appointment, ask questions, take notes, want to be involved in every aspect. When their daughter is born, both of them would be overwhelmed by the intensity of love they feel. Holding this tiny person they created, seeing features from both of them in her face, would be profound in ways they couldn't have anticipated. The first few months would be exhausting, punctuated by sleepless nights and the steep learning curve of new parenthood. They'd take turns with night feedings, support each other through moments of doubt and frustration, celebrate small milestones with disproportionate joy. Their daughter would become the center of their world in ways that feel both natural and slightly terrifying. As their daughter grows, they'd delight in watching her personality emerge. She'd show signs of magic early, accidental magic that would make them laugh and occasionally scramble to explain to confused Muggle neighbors. They'd create a home environment rich with books and opportunities for learning, but also with play and creativity. They'd take her to Diagon Alley and let her marvel at the magical world, but also to Muggle parks and museums, wanting her to appreciate both halves of her heritage. She'd grow up bilingual in a sense, comfortable in both magical and Muggle contexts, which would serve her well later in life. When their daughter shows the first signs of having inherited Hermione's intellectual curiosity and Cedric's interpersonal skills, they'd both feel pride mixed with awareness of the pressure those gifts might create. They'd be careful not to push too hard, not to make achievement the measure of worth, while still encouraging her to develop her talents. They'd tell her that they're proud of who she is, not just what she accomplishes, that kindness and integrity matter more than grades or accolades. It would be a delicate balance, one they wouldn't always get right. But they'd keep trying, keep adjusting, keep learning how to parent this specific child rather than some idealized version. If they have a second child, the dynamics would shift again. They'd navigate sibling rivalry and different personalities, the challenge of giving each child individual attention while managing a household. Their second child might be more like Cedric temperamentally, easygoing and social, or might be completely different from both of them, which would require adapting their parenting approach. They'd make mistakes, lose their tempers sometimes, feel guilty about not being perfect parents, but they'd also apologize when they mess up. Model the kind of relationship they want their children to have. Show that love includes working through conflicts rather than avoiding them. Their children would grow up hearing stories about their parents' Hogwarts years, but carefully curated ones. The younger versions would hear about the Triwizard Tournament as an exciting competition, about brave champions facing dragons and solving puzzles. As they got older, they'd learn about the darker aspects, about how close their father came to dying, about the war that followed, about the friends and family members who didn't survive. Hermione and Cedric would answer their children's questions honestly but age-appropriately, never lying but also not traumatizing them with details they're too young to process. The children would also grow up around their parents' friend group, seeing Harry Potter as Uncle Harry who tells silly jokes and plays Quidditch with them in the backyard. They'd know Aunt Ginny as a professional Quidditch player who's fierce and funny, and sometimes teaches them flying tricks that make their parents nervous. Uncle Ron would be the one who sneaks them sweets and makes them laugh with his self-deprecating humor. Aunt Luna would tell them stories about fantastic creatures and see magic in everyday things. Uncle Neville would bring them plants from Hogwarts and teach them about herbology with patience and enthusiasm. These relationships would give the children a rich extended family beyond just their parents. Hermione's relationship with her own parents would be complicated by the war. If she obliviated them and sent them to Australia as in the original timeline, restoring their memories afterward would create some awkwardness and pain. Her parents would remember loving a daughter, then have a gap, then suddenly remember again, and that discontinuity would affect their relationship. They might feel hurt that Hermione made such a drastic choice without consulting them, even as they intellectually understand she was trying to protect them. Rebuilding that trust would take time and patience from everyone involved. Cedric would help bridge some of those gaps, being respectful and patient with Hermione's parents, helping them understand the context of wartime decisions without excusing the pain those decisions caused. He'd make an effort to include them in their lives, to send regular updates, to visit when possible. His genuine affection for Hermione and his obvious commitment to their family would help reassure the Grangers that their daughter is in good hands. Over time, they'd develop their own relationship with Cedric, independent of Hermione, appreciating him for who he is, rather than just as their daughter's husband. When the Grangers become grandparents, it would open new dimensions to their relationship with Hermione. They'd delight in their grandchildren, and seeing her parents with her children would heal something in Hermione, witnessing the love that transcends the pain of the past. The children would benefit from having grandparents who can teach them about Muggle life, who can provide perspective from outside the magical world, who can spoil them in the way grandparents do. These visits would become important family traditions, times when magical and Muggle worlds blend seamlessly in the love they all share for these children. Cedric's relationship with his own parents would deepen after the war. Amos Diggory, who came so close to losing his son, would be intensely grateful that Cedric survived. He'd have a somewhat complicated relationship with Hermione, grateful to her for saving Cedric's life, but also perhaps a bit resentful that his son continues to put himself in danger for causes she champions. Mrs. Diggory would be warmer, welcoming Hermione into the family without reservation, becoming a mother figure who offers different wisdom than Hermione's own mother, someone who understands the magical world and can advise her on navigating it. As Amos ages and eventually retires from the ministry, he and Cedric would have conversations they never had time for when Cedric was younger. Amos would share stories about his own career, his regrets and triumphs, his hopes for his son. He'd talk about the fear he felt during the war, the helplessness of not being able to protect Cedric, the pride he feels now watching Cedric build a meaningful life. These conversations would help Cedric understand his father in new ways, seeing him not just as a parent but as a full person with his own struggles and dreams. When Amos eventually passes away, it would be Cedric's first experience with grief as an adult, losing a parent. Hermione would support him through it, understanding grief intimately from her own losses during the war. She'd help him plan the funeral, would hold him when he cries, would know when he needs space and when he needs company. The loss would hit Cedric hard, making him acutely aware of his own mortality, of time passing, of the importance of the years he has. It would deepen his commitment to living fully, to making sure his own children know he loves them, to not taking any day for granted. Their professional lives would continue to evolve as they age. Hermione would eventually move up in the ministry hierarchy, perhaps becoming head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, or even a candidate for Minister of Magic eventually, though she might decide she can do more good in a position with less politics and more direct impact. She'd mentor young witches and wizards entering the ministry, particularly Muggle-borns facing the discrimination she once faced, helping them navigate the system and encouraging them to push for change from within. Cedric would become one of the most respected Auror trainers in the ministry's history, known for producing Aurors who are both highly skilled and ethically grounded. He'd eventually write training manuals that become standard texts, teach advanced courses, and serve as a consultant on difficult cases. His former students would speak of him with a mixture of respect and affection, crediting him with teaching them not just how to fight, but when to fight and when to choose other paths. Some of them would become leaders in the department themselves, spreading his philosophy of ethical law enforcement to new generations. Together, Hermione and Cedric would occasionally collaborate on cases where law enforcement and legal reform intersect. When Hermione identifies systemic issues in how certain laws are enforced, Cedric would have insight into why Aurors behave the way they do, helping her craft solutions that address root causes rather than just symptoms. When Cedric sees patterns in the types of situations his Aurors encounter, Hermione could help identify legislative changes that might prevent those situations from arising. Their partnership would extend beyond their personal life into meaningful professional collaboration that makes the wizarding world materially better. As they age, they'd face the normal challenges of long-term relationships. There would be periods where work consumes one or both of them, where they have to consciously prioritize their relationship and make time for each other. There would be arguments about parenting decisions, about money, about whose career takes precedence at various moments. There would be times when they frustrate each other, when Hermione's intensity grates on Cedric, or when his diplomacy feels like avoidance to Hermione. But they'd have built enough foundation, enough trust and communication skills to work through these conflicts rather than letting them fester. Their intimate life would evolve with age as well, becoming less frequent perhaps, but often more meaningful, a coming together that's about connection and comfort as much as passion. They'd learn to appreciate different kinds of intimacy too, the holding hands while reading, the casual touches throughout the day, the inside jokes and shared glances that communicate volumes without words. The friendship that formed the foundation of their relationship would remain strong, ensuring that even when passion wanes temporarily, they still genuinely enjoy each other's company. When their children leave for Hogwarts, both Hermione and Cedric would feel the empty nest acutely. The house that's been full of noise and activity would suddenly feel too quiet. They'd have to rediscover how to be just the two of them again. Not parents, but partners. Individuals with interests and identities beyond raising children. It would be an adjustment, sometimes awkward, but ultimately positive, giving them time to reconnect with each other and with the parts of themselves that got buried under parenting responsibilities. They'd develop new rituals for this stage of life. Regular date nights where they try new restaurants or see plays. Weekend trips to places they've always wanted to visit but never had time for. Pursuing hobbies they'd set aside, Hermione perhaps joining a book club or taking up painting, Cedric spending more time on advanced flying techniques or coaching youth Quidditch. They'd make an effort to maintain their connection while also allowing each other space for individual growth. Understanding that the strongest partnerships allow both people to be fully themselves. Their children's time at Hogwarts would bring its own concerns and joys. Hermione and Cedric would try not to be helicopter parents, but it would be hard not to worry, not to want to protect their children from every possible harm. They'd have to trust that they've raised their children well, that they've given them the tools to navigate challenges, that Hogwarts staff will keep them reasonably safe when their children face their own difficulties. Bullying or academic struggles or social drama, Hermione and Cedric would offer advice and support while resisting the urge to swoop in and fix everything. Their children's sorting would be significant moments. If their eldest ends up in Ravenclaw, Hermione and Cedric would both feel pride in her intellectual gifts, while also worrying slightly about the pressure she might put on herself. They'd write her letters encouraging her to have fun, to make friends, to remember that life is about more than just academic achievement. If their second child goes to Hufflepuff, Cedric would be thrilled, though careful not to show favoritism, while Hermione would appreciate the values that house represents, even if it's not where she herself was sorted. If one of their children ended up in Slytherin, it would be an interesting test of their principles. They've both said that houses don't define people, that Slytherin has unfairly been stereotyped, but having a child actually sorted there would require living those values. They'd support their child completely, make sure they know that their house doesn't change their parents' love or pride, and would actively combat any prejudice the child faces from other families who still view Slytherin negatively. This would be an opportunity to model the acceptance and open-mindedness they've always advocated for. Their children's friendships at Hogwarts would span houses, reflecting the lessons their parents taught them. They'd be the kind of students who sit at different house tables, who don't participate in inter-house prejudice, who judge people on their character rather than their sorting. They'd face some pushback from more traditional students, but they'd also find kindred spirits. Other children raised by parents who fought in the war and want a better world for the next generation. When their children face their OWLs and NEWTs, Hermione would have to consciously not project her own perfectionism onto them. She'd want to help them study, to ensure they're prepared. But Cedric would remind her that their children aren't her, that they have different strengths and goals, that they need to find their own paths, rather than living up to their mother's legendary academic achievements. It would be a struggle for Hermione, but she'd work on it, on being supportive without being overbearing, on celebrating their successes without making them feel that love is conditional on achievement. Career guidance for their children would be approached carefully. Hermione and Cedric would want to support whatever their children choose, whether it's ministry work, teaching, Quidditch, magical creature care, or something entirely unexpected. They'd share their own experiences, talk about the joys and challenges of their careers, but ultimately emphasize that their children should pursue what brings them fulfillment and allows them to contribute to the world in ways that align with their values. If one of their children wants to do something completely different from their parents, something in the Muggle world or something creative rather than service-oriented, Hermione and Cedric would support that, even if it means releasing expectations they didn't realize they were holding. As grandchildren arrive, Hermione and Cedric would embrace grandparenthood with joy. They'd be the kind of grandparents who have time and patience for things they were sometimes too busy for as parents. They'd tell stories, play games, teach their grandchildren magic in age-appropriate ways, and spoil them just enough without undermining their parents' authority. They'd take pride in watching their own children navigate parenthood, seeing the values they tried to instill being passed down another generation. Their grandchildren would grow up knowing that their grandparents did important things, fought in a war, made the world better, but mostly they'd know them as the people who make cookies on Sunday afternoons, who have interesting books in every room, who still hold hands after decades together, who laugh together at private jokes. The ordinariness of their grandparents' daily life would be a testament to the peace they fought for, the ability to have a normal, loving family life without constant danger or threat. as Hermione and Cedric enter true old age. They'd slow down physically but remain sharp mentally. They'd reduce their work hours, eventually retire, spend more time at home and with family. They'd travel to places they've always wanted to see, take cruises or tours designed for older witches and wizards, enjoy the freedom of having time and resources to pursue interests without the pressure of careers or child-rearing. They'd attend reunions of DA members, gathering with fellow war veterans to remember and honor those who didn't make it, to celebrate how far they've all come, to support each other through the challenges of aging. Their relationship in old age would be comfortable and deep, shaped by decades of shared experiences. They'd know each other's stories by heart, finish each other's sentences, have the kind of wordless communication that comes from a lifetime together. They'd bicker occasionally about small things, but the big stuff would be settled. The fundamental questions of who they are and what they value would be answered and aligned. They'd hold hands while watching the sunset, content in the simple pleasure of being together, grateful for every additional day they get, when so many of their generation didn't get to grow old. When one of them eventually passes away, and given average lifespans, it might be Cedric first since he's older. The surviving partner would experience profound grief even though they've known for years this moment was coming. Hermione, if she survives Cedric, would speak at his funeral about the life they built together, about his kindness and courage, about how he made her a better person and the world a better place. She'd cry openly, not ashamed of her grief, and their children and grandchildren would surround her with love and support. The remaining years, if Hermione survives Cedric, would be hard, but not empty. She'd have her family, her grandchildren, her friends who are also dealing with loss as their generation ages. She'd have her memories, decades of happy marriage to sustain her. She'd perhaps write a memoir, not about her own accomplishments necessarily, but about the people who shaped her, about Cedric and Harry and Ron and all the others who made her who she is. She'd want to preserve their stories for future generations, to ensure that what they fought for and believed in isn't forgotten. When Hermione eventually passes, she'd be surrounded by family, her children and grandchildren, and she'd go peacefully, ready to see Cedric again if there's anything beyond death, or ready to rest if there isn't. Her funeral would be attended by hundreds, ministry officials and former students and activists whose causes she championed, and family members whose lives she touched. The tributes would emphasize not just her brilliance or her achievements, but her compassion, her commitment to justice, her capacity for love, and her partnership with Cedric that modeled what healthy, equal relationships could look like. In the decades after their deaths, Hermione and Cedric would be remembered in various ways. There might be ministry awards named after them, scholarships for Muggle-born students, training programs bearing Cedric's name. Their children and grandchildren would carry forward their values, continuing the work they started. The changes they fought for would be so embedded in wizarding society that younger generations wouldn't remember, a time when house elves had no rights, or when werewolves faced unchecked discrimination, or when Muggle-borns were routinely called mudblood without consequence. But perhaps most importantly, they'd be remembered in the small, personal ways that matter most. Their grandchildren would tell their own children stories about great-grandma Hermione and great-grandpa Cedric, about how they met during a dangerous tournament, about how they fell in love and fought in a war and built a beautiful life together. They'd remember specific moments, the way Cedric would look at Hermione like she hung the stars, the way Hermione would light up when Cedric entered a room even after 50 years together, the inside jokes and the tenderness and the genuine partnership that defined their relationship. Future students at Hogwarts would perhaps learn about them in history of magic classes, but the academic version would be sterile compared to the lived reality. The facts about legislation passed and aurors trained would be recorded, but the emotional truth of what it meant to love and be loved during wartime, to build hope in the midst of darkness, to choose each other every day for decades, that would live on in the stories families tell, in the example they set for what love can be. The alternate timeline where Hermione and Cedric fall in love and build a life together represents something profoundly hopeful. It suggests that even in the darkest times, love can flourish. It demonstrates that partnership built on respect, shared values, and genuine affection can weather any storm. It shows that people can heal from trauma without letting it define them, that they can honor those they've lost while still living fully. that they can fight for justice while also building personal happiness. For readers and fans who explore this possibility, it offers a vision of what might have been, a road not taken in the original story, but no less valid or meaningful for being alternate. It invites us to consider how different choices, different chances, different moments could reshape a narrative we thought we knew. It reminds us that in any rich fictional world, countless stories exist beyond the one we're told, each one illuminating different truths about love, loss, courage, and what it means to build a life worth living. The story of Hermione Granger and Cedric Diggory, whether tragic or triumphant, whether brief or spanning decades, ultimately resonates because it speaks to universal human experiences. How do we love when loss is possible? How do we find joy in the midst of struggle? How do we balance personal happiness with responsibility to larger causes? How do we build meaning from the materials life gives us, even when those materials include trauma and grief? These questions don't have simple answers, which is exactly why exploring them through the lens of these characters is so compelling and worthwhile. That's a story worth telling, worth imagining, worth celebrating, and it enriches our understanding of both characters and the world they inhabit in ways that resonate long after the final page.